You're listening to How to Drink Less, and I'm your host, Adriana Cloud. Whether your goal is to cut back, take a break, or say goodbye to alcohol for good, this podcast will help you stop drinking on autopilot, learn how to manage cravings, and feel fully in control around alcohol. It's easier than you think. Listen on to find out how. Hi friends! Thanks for joining me for another episode. Today I want to talk about a common pitfall that I see all the time in people who are trying to change their relationship with alcohol, and that's all or nothing thinking, also called black and white thinking. As these names suggest, this is the tendency to think in extremes without any middle ground or nuance. It's super common in all areas of life, actually. But in the context of our drinking habits, here's what that looks like. Let's say you told yourself you wouldn't drink tonight, but you had a really stressful day at work, and the moment you got home, you made a beeline for the fridge and opened a beer, and you drank half of it before you even remembered that you were meant to be having an alcohol-free night. Now, in that moment, you have a choice. You could decide to put away the rest of the beer or to pour it out and switch to drinking something non-alcoholic. But if you tend to think in black and white terms, then you'd probably go, well, tonight is already ruined, so I might as well finish the beer. And so you keep drinking. Or maybe you've set a goal for yourself to not drink Monday through Thursday, and you get through Monday okay, but then Tuesday, your friend invites you for a drink because she got some good news and she wants to celebrate. You don't want to disappoint your friend, so you join her and you have a couple of drinks. And if you're caught in all or nothing thinking, you might then say to yourself, well, I blew it. I didn't stick to my goal, so I should just give up on this week. So you write off the rest of the week as a failure and you vow to start fresh next Monday. And since you've already hit pause on the goal until next week, you proceed to drink on Wednesday and Thursday and so on. Black and white thinking shows up in how we think about our overall relationship with alcohol as well. It sounds something like, if I can't quit completely, then I might as well not even try. So for people who are working on a longer-term goal, let's say a dry January challenge or taking a year off booze, if they end up drinking at some point and therefore breaking their commitment to the goal, they give up on the whole goal. They throw in the towel. They tell themselves, well, clearly I'm not able to do this. This is too hard. And if I didn't succeed on the first try, I might as well give up. There's no point in even trying. And this all or nothing mentality shows up even earlier sometimes, when people are just starting to think about their goals. Many people don't actually have a clear idea of what they want their long-term relationship with alcohol to look like. They're not sure if they're ready to quit for good or if they just want to get to a point where they don't need to drink every night or they want to be able to stop at one drink. And because they don't have a clear idea yet of where they want to go, they tell themselves that it's not worth trying to make any changes at all until they figured out what they want long term. They have this idea that they need to have the whole journey to their final goal mapped out, or there's no point in changing anything about their drinking at all. Which is basically the equivalent of when you don't know what you want to eat for lunch, deciding not to eat anything at all. That's kind of what it's like, which is a ridiculous way to go through life, as I'm sure you will agree. And finally, another way that I see black and white thinking sabotaging people is in how they think about themselves compared to other people. So this sounds like there's only two categories of people, normal drinkers and alcoholics. So if I'm not able to drink normally, quote unquote, I must be an alcoholic or an addict. Black and white thinking is really seductive. There's something really satisfying about a neat divide because a neat divide is easier for the brain to process. when there are only two options, when it's this or that, a yes or a no, I'm succeeding or I'm failing, our brain can make that call quite quickly without having to muddle through nuance and tolerate uncertainty. But here's why black and white thinking is a problem. Because change is usually not a binary choice between this and that. Change is often messy, imperfect, and full of gray areas. Black and white thinking turns small slips into binges followed by shame spirals. If you've had one drink or even half a drink and your brain says, today's ruined, I might as well give up, you might end up having 3 or 5 drinks. Not because you needed them or really wanted them, but because your brain said, what's the point now? We already started. All or nothing thinking dismisses progress. If you've gone 4 days without alcohol and then you have a drink, your brain tells you that you failed and you're back at square one, even though that's clearly not true. So instead of celebrating that you were able to have 4 alcohol-free days and reflecting on that progress, you end up focusing only on that one day when you slipped and you beat yourself up for that. And what happens when shame kicks in? That's right. You try to run away from it at all costs. In the short term, you probably end up drinking more to numb the shame. And in the long term, you're probably more hesitant to recommit yourself to the goal and try again, because your brain is now flashing the warning sign. There's danger ahead. There's the potential of feeling shame again, and we don't want that, do we? So we're better off not even trying, right? That's probably the track running through your mind, because there's safety in the familiar, in not putting yourself out there, in not risking feeling shame again. I wonder if this resonates with you. Have you ever told yourself, I blew it after a single drink? Or this week or this challenge is ruined since I already gave in once? I wonder if you can think back to those moments and remember what happened next. As I said, these sorts of thinking patterns are quite common, and they show up in many different areas of our lives, even for people who've never had a drop of alcohol in their lives. And black and white thinking is completely normal. It's not a character flaw, but actually a survival strategy. It comes from an evolutionary past when our brains didn't have time to process nuance because they had to make a choice in a split second. When it's a matter of life or death, our brains don't have the luxury of debating gray areas and weighing arguments for the opposition. No, there's no time for that because acting fast is what's necessary for survival. And in most cases, that means erring on the side of caution, erring towards safety, erring towards the status quo and away from the unknown. This is true for our human brains overall, for our entire species, but it might be even more true for you, depending on your own history and your past. So, to reiterate, all or nothing thinking is not a flaw or a defect that you need to fix. But it's important to notice where that kind of thinking comes up for you, because it might well be standing in the way of you sustainably changing your drinking habits. I've definitely engaged in my fair share of all or nothing thinking. I still do it to this day when it comes to food. If I've had a bite from a candy bar, let's say, I sometimes tell myself that I might as well finish the whole candy bar since I've already had too much sugar anyway, so why not keep going? But back when I was drinking, one way this pattern showed up for me was that I would almost never leave a drink unfinished. If there was alcohol in my glass, I would finish it. The possibility of leaving half a pint of beer behind was just completely unthinkable to me. It did not even cross my mind that this was an option. And if I was at home pouring a glass of wine, well, then I was definitely going to finish the bottle. The first time I attempted dry January, I ended up drinking around day 27 or so. I don't remember now exactly what happened on that day to make me say, that's it, I'm giving up. But the more interesting thing was that I, of course, then decided that there was no point trying to stay sober the last 4 days of the month. Because I'd already had some drinks, the logical thing, and I say logical in quotation marks, the logical thing was to keep drinking. And I know I'm not the only one. Almost every client I've ever worked with has a story like this. I had a client just recently share that she was going through something challenging, and even though she was not planning on drinking on that particular Friday, she was out with friends and someone handed her a cocktail and she drank it. Her inner critic then kicked in, and she told herself that she was a failure, and she proceeded to drink all weekend, making herself feel a lot worse than if she had just had that one drink and stopped then. So, what is the antidote? The antidote is, first of all, to separate the facts from the meaning that you attach to the facts. You had 2 glasses of wine, that's a fact. You drank on a Wednesday, that's a fact. But then notice the meaning you're layering on. Are you making those 2 glasses of wine mean that you're a failure? The fact that you drank on a Wednesday, are you making that mean that the whole week is ruined? While the facts are facts and therefore unchangeable, the meaning you're slapping onto them is entirely optional. One way I've heard this separation described is separating the math from the drama. I first heard this in the context of money, that in our relationship with money, there's the math or the actual number, and then there's all our stories and beliefs and prejudices, in other words, all our thoughts that we attach to the number. That's the drama. And I'm not the first one to attach this concept to drinking either. My mentor, Rachel Hart, uses this tool as well to separate the math of how much we've had to drink from the drama or the story about it. So that's the first step. Try to isolate the facts of what happened. And the next step is to look for nuance and flexibility and explore the gray area. If your brain wants to tell you you failed, try to see this merely as data and ask yourself, what can you learn from this data? What might you try to do differently next time? If your brain says this day is ruined, remind yourself that every single moment is an opportunity to make a different choice. We literally do this all day long. We make one decision after another, and there's no reason why you should let a past decision dictate what you do next. And if you're stuck in all or nothing thinking about your identity as a drinker, and you're telling yourself, I can't control my drinking, so I might as well not even try, tell yourself, any change I make matters. Small changes add up over time. The other thing I want you to do is challenge your brain to look for the nuance. Come up with some examples of when you were actually able to exercise control and to stop. You can't jump from telling yourself that you have zero control to believing you're a wizard of willpower and won't ever waver again. But notice that there is a vast area between always and never. Can you allow for the fact that sometimes you can say no, that sometimes you can stop at 1 or 2 drinks, that you're making some change in your drinking habits? It might seem like I'm quibbling over semantics here, and your brain might want to dismiss this exercise as pointless, but I promise you, this change in perspective is everything. If you can start training yourself to see the vast sea of gray that lies between black and white, between all or nothing, you will be in a much better position to make more aligned choices. When we engage in all or nothing thinking, we're zooming out. We're generalizing. We're taking one instance of a thing and drawing conclusions about something bigger. You know you're doing this if you use words like always or never. For example, I'll never be able to quit. I will always struggle. Or when you say things like, the fact that I drank on Wednesday means the whole week is ruined. You see how this is jumping from the specific to the general, right? And what I invite you to do instead is to zoom in. Focus on the specific and stay with the specific. If you drank on a Wednesday, all that means is that you drank on a Wednesday. It doesn't have to mean you also drink on Thursday. That part is optional, and the way to remember that is to stay with the specific. Pretend you're trying to limit the spread of whatever happened on Wednesday to just Wednesday. An analogy you might find helpful is to think about if you're driving and you get distracted and you accidentally drive onto the shoulder. You don't then tell yourself, well, I failed at driving in my lane, so I might as well keep driving off the road and into the ditch. No, you immediately course correct, you take control of the wheel, and you steer yourself back to safety as fast as possible. Another analogy to think about is if you pop a tire, which I don't know why I'm so into car examples since I don't even drive, but here we are. So imagine you pop a tire and then you go, oh well, I might as well slash the other 3 tires since this one is already ruined. You see what an absurd decision that would be. No one in their right mind would do that. No, if you punctured a tire, you would just go ahead and have that one tire fixed. You would not continue to make the problem worse. And yet, we do this to ourselves all the time when we're trying to change our drinking habits. We make the problem worse. This is my invitation for you to stop doing that. Anytime you notice your brain engaging in all or nothing thinking, hit the pause button. Separate the facts from your story about the facts. And then look for ways to reframe and remind yourself that all is not lost. In any given situation, no matter what happened in the previous moment, you now have an opportunity to make a new choice. Every single moment is an opportunity to course correct. Don't persevere in the mistake. You know that saying, if you get on the wrong train, get off at the next station. The longer it takes you to get off, the more expensive the return trip will be. This applies to drinking too. If you open the bottle, you can stop and redirect before you pour. If you've poured the glass, you can stop and redirect before you take the first sip. If you've already had one glass, you can stop and redirect and not pour a second glass. If you had 6 drinks on a Wednesday, you can choose to have 0 drinks on Thursday. Because staying on the wrong train makes the return journey harder and more shameful. The last thing I want to share with you today is a tool I teach my clients and which I learned in the early days of my sobriety. And it is to get a jar or some vessel of some kind and start adding a bead or a button or a small rock or a piece of paper, just some small object into the jar for every day when you meet your goal. Whatever your goal is currently, whether it's to stop at 1 drink or to have 0 drinks, on a day when you're able to meet that goal, you put a bead in the jar. On a day when you don't meet your goal, meaning you end up drinking more than you planned to, you don't put a new bead in the jar, but crucially, you do not empty the jar either. So often when we're trying to break a habit like drinking, we get trapped into the mentality of day 1, meaning that when you drink, you're back to square one, starting all over again. But nothing could be further from the truth. You're not back to square one. All the work you've done is not lost. Those days when you met your goal, all those sober days, they still count. You did that. That progress is never lost. And when you can see all of those beads in the jar and see them adding up, it's so much easier for your brain to remember how much you've already accomplished. So I highly recommend you do that. You can also do it with stickers in a journal, but I love the beads or rocks in a jar version because it's very tactile. You can see that you're building something and it's growing, literally, with every success. Because this is what black and white thinking deprives us of, celebrating our successes. When you're busy berating yourself because you broke your commitment, guess what you're not doing? You're not noticing what is working, what you're already doing well, what you're learning, what's becoming easier, how you're continuing to show up, how you're growing your courage and resilience, and all the subtle changes in who you are becoming from one day to the next. All of this is what you lose when you're stuck in black and white thinking. And when you don't celebrate what is working and you don't acknowledge your progress, not only is it hard to stay motivated and keep going, but you miss out on growing the very skills that will help you to continue making changes. All right, my friends, that's it for today. Thank you for tuning in. And please make sure to come back for next week's episode, because I will be talking about another common pitfall that is very closely related to black and white thinking, and that is perfectionism. Even if you don't identify as a perfectionist, I promise you, you probably have at least some perfectionist tendencies, and odds are those tendencies are standing in the way of you making the changes you want to see in your drinking habits. Trust me, you don't want to miss that episode and my tips for dealing with perfectionism. So make sure you follow and subscribe to the podcast on whatever app you normally consume podcasts on. All right, friends, take good care and I'll see you next week. If you're looking for practical advice for how to say no to alcohol and say yes to yourself, you will want to get on my email list. Sign up to receive my free guide with 7 steps to kickstart your sobriety. The link is in the show notes, so go and grab it now, and I'll see you soon in your inbox.